Hi everybody, this is Christine from the Door Doctor, and today we're going to do really quick and easy, very sparkly, cute rose gold mesh flower wreath. For this wreath, I'm going to be using an 8-inch wire Dollar Tree frame. I've already gone ahead and attached number 5 plastic mesh that I just cut in a circle, and I attached it with zip ties to the center of the wire wreath frame. That way we can apply flower petals all the way in. And for this wreath, we're going to be doing 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of petals. And this should make a wreath that's approximately 15 inches in diameter. If you want to upsize to using a 12-inch wreath frame, that should give you about a 20-inch diameter wreath. And I've made this before using a 16-inch wire wreath frame. Obviously you add more rows of petals to fill things in, but that gives you about a 24-inch diameter flower wreath if you use that size. All right, so that's going to be our frame. For mesh, we're going to be using this fabric mesh. It's the fabric jute mesh, I believe is how they label it. This is from craftoutlet.com. It's a metallic ombre rose gold mesh, and so you can see it has the background sort of like a creamy white, and then it has rose gold, a little bit of silver, and regular gold throughout that, and that gives a nice sort of swirl design to the petals. So for the 8-inch wire wreath frame, you're going to need 1 roll of this mesh. Obviously, if you go bigger, you're going to need more. When I make the larger flower with the 12-inch frame, I use 2 rolls of this mesh. For the center, we're going to do this braided center with, this is a complementary rose gold metallic mesh, foil mesh. It's a 10-inch wide mesh, just like the ombre mesh. And this is going to just be a nice little cute, easy flower center. You're going to need your glue gun for that. And then, of course, my 8-inch zip ties. This is what I use to make my petals and attach all my petals. And then in the end, we're going to be using just a nice little backing. This is a flesh-colored felt that I cut into a circle to fit over the back of the wreath, and then just another little pipe cleaner to use to hang the wreath with. We're not going to be using our wood burner today because I'm not using poly burlap as usual. We're just going to be using a rotary cutter to cut all of our mesh. All right, so I'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and start cutting our mesh. All right, welcome back. So I have my rose gold mesh here, and I'm just going to use my rotary cutter and cut this into 10-inch squares. It's a 10-inch wide mesh. I'm just going to get rid of some of this extra. And each roll will give you approximately, 35, 36 squares, depending on how much you cut off or how much you waste. And as you can see, I have a well-loved cutting mat with lots of marks in it from cutting mesh like this. I don't use the wood burner for this type of mesh, mainly because it has all of these little, almost like little fabric pieces that tend to burn if you use the wood burner. And it doesn't really cut them, it just sort of singes them. It doesn't really give a nice edge, so rotary tool it is. All right, so we're gonna cut, like I said, this is gonna take a full roll, and I've already cut a bunch, so we're just going to do a few more here and move on to actually making our petals. This gives a lot of glitter, a lot of metallic glitter on your cutting board, so you'll make a nice mess of things there. Okay, so for petals, we're going to be making a daisy petal. I've used this in some of my other tutorials. This is really simple. I pre-made a whole bunch of them. You're going to use zip ties to close it. What I like about a petal like this is you don't have to worry about fraying because all the loose cut edges are going to get tucked away. So you can kind of see in the back, they kind of get tucked away and trimmed. So you don't have to worry about messy mesh. All right, so to make this petal, you're going to take your 10 by 10 inch square and you're going to fold it into a triangle. And usually I start, I think I get into a habit of, this mesh has this solid rose gold stripe along one of the cut, or rather one of the seamed ends. And so I keep that towards me just as a habit. So I do that for each of my petals. I fold them in the same direction. And so I'm going to keep that rose gold stripe towards my stomach. I'm going to take this corner down here, my left lower corner, bring it up to the right upper corner, and fold that into as neat a triangle as I can. And then you're going to gather this somewhere along the halfway point of this triangle. So you're not folding along the folded seam, so you're not creasing there or gathering there. You're not gathering along these triangular sides, but you're going to go right across the midsection of the triangle from one end to the next. Almost looks like bat wings of some sort. And that's what it should look like. And then you're going to take each of these loose ends, here and here, and pull them into the center where you've already pinched some of the mesh. So there's one. And it takes a little practice because you do want to get as much of the loose ends sort of tucked into these little corners as you can. But there you go. So shape it a little bit. And then I'm going to use my zip tie just to close that. All right. Get rid of the zip tie end. I usually like to round it out a little bit. It's sort of coved upwards. It's almost like a little scooped, a little bowl shape. All right. So we'll do a couple more. So again, I keep my rose gold stripe towards me, left lower corner, bring it up to the right upper corner, make a nice triangle, keep all your edges together, and then we're going to gather across the middle from one end to the next, or to the opposite end, sorry. And then we're going to take these two loose edges, swoop them in, bring them into the center where you started to pinch all the mesh. There we go. Make sure your little loose edges are kind of tucked in. And for this wreath, I believe I used 35 to 36 petals. So like I mentioned, a full roll of this mesh. And we're going to do 4 rows of petals. And when you make them, you're just going to overlap them a little bit with the one next to it. And that tends to give a nice, I don't know, it's like almost like a little swirl design. It's a simple mesh, but when you place it that way, it really gives it a lot of movement. All right. One more. We'll do a couple more. Bring that side in, bring this side in, shape it a little bit, make it nice and round. Use your zip tie. I usually like to make sure everything's tucked in before I give that zip tie one last squeeze. And then we make our triangle. Gather across the middle. Bring the right side in, bring the left side in. Pinch it and zip tie it. All right, shape it up a little bit. All right, so there's 5 of our petals. And then usually, let me grab my cutting tool here. Usually I like using this nice multi-cut tool I bought on Amazon to trim away all of this extra. So anything below this zip tie you're going to get rid of. So just make it nice and neat. My tool's getting a little bit dull, but these are very sharp when you purchase them, so be careful. And it sort of makes quick work of cutting through all of that mesh. All right. So now let's go on to make row 1 of this flower wreath. So 8-inch wreath frame. You know, most times when I use this size frame for flower, I'm using this second row for my first row of petals. But for this particular flower, I actually use the outer row. It gives, just so it can give me a little bit more diameter on the wreath. You know, I think it's a little too small if I pull them in to that second wire rim. And if I bring them out to the outer one, I get a nice 15, 16-inch flower, and I can add 4 rows of petals pretty nicely. And the other thing I do for this flower is I actually flip it over. You know, most of these wire frames, you can see that they sort of, they curve down this way. I don't know if I can show that. And so most times I use it with this side facing up, but for whatever reason, I've adjusted to flipping this into almost like a little concave shape, like a little bowl shape, and using it this way so that this is the front of the flower, and we're going to use this outer metal edge for the petals, and so they just sort of scoop upward a little bit. All right, and so, you know, this is a full roll of mesh for all these petals. The outer row, you know, there's 3 sections in total on this wreath frame, and so we're going to put 4 to 5 petals in each section. So about 14, 15 petals, really depends on how tight you want to place them. All right, so we're going to use our zip tie on that outer piece of wire. Apply our first petal. The other thing I like to do is when you place the first petal with a zip tie, the thing that drives me nuts is you can see it's kind of going sideways, right? It's not perfectly perpendicular to the frame like a petal might be. And so what I'll do is I use 2 zip ties to attach each of these petals on the outer row. And I place one going in one direction and then one going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to put number 2 in, and just by doing that, it straightens the petal. All right, so you use extra zip ties, but it gives it a little more strength, and it faces nice and perpendicular to your frame. All right, and now we're just going to work our way around. So there's zip tie 1. Going that way, and there's zip tie 2 going in the other direction. There we go. And I'm just going to overlap these a little bit. All right. Number 3. So for each petal, you're going to end up using 3 zip ties, at least for this outer row. You're not going to need the extra zip tie once you move into the middle of the frame. All right, I'm going to put that a little closer. Stop and pause and see. I'm just going to overlap each petal a little bit. Do a couple more. Slide that guy over there. And then we'll do number 5. And of course, as I'm doing this, they're mowing the lawn outside at my neighbor's house. So you're probably going to hear lawnmowers, but what are you going to do? That's life. All right. So let me just snip these zip ties. I'll show you our progress. And probably what I'll do is take a quick break to fill in the rest of this row. So there's the first 5. You can sort of see how they're attached to that outer frame with 2 different crisscrossed zip ties. So I'll finish row 1. I think I'm going to end up using another 10 flower petals, and then we'll come back for row 2. Okay? All right, so now we finished row number 1, and as you can see, I did manage to get 15 petals in there, and they're all slightly overlapping the petal next to them. Okay, so now we're going to move on to row 2 of 4, and row 2, you're only going to need 1 zip tie per petal, and I'm going to place this next row just along this border where my mesh starts. And I imagine I'm going to get about 8 petals, 8 to 10 sometimes, depending on the size of the petals or how tightly I want them to, touch, or how closely I want them to touch. So I'm just going to go in here right along the last row of my mesh and apply petal number 1. You don't need the 2 zip ties because the plastic mesh grid keeps all those petals nice and straight. All right, so the way I usually do row 2 is I like to have all of my petals pretty evenly dispersed around the circle here. And the way to do that for me, at least, is to break this circle into quadrants, almost like, the face of a clock. And so if this is 12 o'clock, I'm going to put another petal directly across it at 6 o'clock, then 1 at 3 o'clock and 1 at 9 o'clock. And then I'll fill in the space in between. I realize saying this out loud, though, that my children who don't really use clocks with faces on them anymore, they prefer everything to be digital, wouldn't probably immediately understand where 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock are. But I think most of you would. So let's see, 12, there's 6. We'll do 1 over here. Or I'll say north, south, east, and west placement for the petals. That they always understand. Here's number 3. Make sure that guy looks straight. And then number 4. And I'll have to take a step back and decide how many petals I think I can get in there. You want them to overlap, but you don't want them to be too tight. All right, so here's my first 4. Just gonna take a look here. So really the question is whether I wanna put 1 or 2. I think 1. So you've got your first 4 petals, and now we're gonna fill in these different gaps with just 1 petal evenly spaced. So that'll be a total of 8 petals in this row. So here's number 5. Go around here. Number 6. Number 7. This is a really pretty mesh. I like the rose gold, but they have on craftoutlet.com, which is where I got this mesh. I don't think I mentioned that. They have a plain gold one that's very pretty. They have pink and red ombre mesh. They have a blue one I haven't used yet. I think you could do just about anything. All right, this is number 8. Okay, so that was a pretty quick row. Get rid of my zip ties here. And then once you've placed them all, you just need to make sure that they all sort of overlap the same way. So usually I go around counterclockwise and make sure that each one, that one looks fine, slightly overlaps the one next to it. So one side up, one side down, one side up, one side down, one side up, one side down, sort of tucked in. All right. So you can see how they each overlap a little bit going around in the circle. And I'll flip that over so you can see where row 2 is, just right along the edge. Okay. So now we're going to do number 3. Number 3, row 3 is going to be just like row 2, just a little bit closer to the center. I'm also going to do 8 petals for this one. And the final row, the center row, will be 6. So you should have 14 more petals ready to go. All right. And for this one, I don't really measure here. I just sort of eyeball where I'm going to put the next row. And I usually place my zip tie just inside where the tip of this petal, the cut edge of the petal ends. All right. So right there, if you can see that, just put it right there. And I'm just going to do a mirror image. Well, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to offset this a little bit because I don't want the petals to be perfectly overlapping the row before it. So we'll do the same quadrant, but we'll start off a little off to the side. I'm filling in this gap here. Yeah, that's better. So here's one. Number 2 will be directly across from it. And we'll do 3 here. So again, just like the base of a clock, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. It's number 3. And number 4. All right. The first 4. All right. And now we're just going to fill in those gaps again with 4 more petals. This is a pretty quick wreath to make because of its size. I like the larger size too. I made this using a 16-inch frame, a 24-inch one. I can't remember how many rows of petals. I think it was 6 rows of petals, 7 rows of petals. It was beautiful, very sparkly. It's one of my favorites, but it's probably one of the simplest to come together. You know, simple in design, just the one mesh, quick little braided center. Tuck that guy into there. Just make sure I'm placing this petal in the right direction. Right. That's 7 and then 8. Oops, a little piece of my mesh poking out. Every so often a strand of the foil will snake its way out. Trim that. All right. So let me just get those zip ties out of the way so you can see this. All right, so row 1, 15 petals, row 2 and 3, 8 and 8. And now we're going to very tightly put the last row just in this little center circle here. And that'll be 6 petals. All right, let's see. And what's nice is this mesh is pretty thin, so it allows you to pack them pretty tightly like this. It's not too bulky. You can kind of zip tie on top of each petal and it'll be okay. So for this, I do 2 sort of north and south, but not the east and west. I'll put 2 facing each other. So there's petal number 1. So petal number 1, I'll have petal number 2 directly across from it. There's 2. Stop for a second. So this is petal 1, petal 2, and then I'll put 2 on each side. I'm gonna have to flip over just to see where I'm going here. There we go. Petal number 3. Flip over here. Put that guy right there. I'll show you at the end where all the zip ties ended up placed. And so they're pretty tight, these last 6. As a result, you don't need a very large flower center. You're not going to fit one, but we'll show you this cute little braided center with the rose gold mesh, the solid metallic mesh. Really nice, simple finishing touch. So let's see. Come back here. This is number 5. There we go. And then number 6. Let's see if I can find. There we go. My mesh is cooperating with me today. Look at that, number 6. Snip the zip tie out of the way. Let me just tuck these all in the right way. Tuck that guy under. A couple little strands that are sticking out. Shape up the petals a little bit. You want to be gentle with them though. You don't want to yank them out of the zip tie. And there we go. So that's the body of your wreath. Nice and sparkly, swirly. I love it. I'll flip it over here and see if I can show you the middle. So that middle row, very tightly placed 6 petals. The second row, let's say about an inch back from the middle row, is 8 petals. Third row right here along the edge of the mesh, another 8, and then your initial 15 petals on that outer rim. All right, so I'm gonna put this to the side. I'm gonna take a quick break, get my glue gun going, and then we'll make the flower center and we'll be pretty much done. Welcome back. So now we're gonna finish our wreath with our rose gold metallic braided center. And my original intention was to try to, just show you how I braided this piece of mesh for the center. But this mesh is really difficult to work with sometimes. It tends to get all caught on each piece, or each strand gets caught on the one next to it. So I actually usually will attach it to a nail hanging on my door that I hang things on, and I usually braid it standing up. So I went ahead and braided it, and now we're going to come back and glue it together. But to do this is just a simple braid. So I made I cut 3 pieces of the rose gold mesh. For this little tiny wreath here, each piece should be 3 feet long. So you're going to have 3 strands, 3 feet long. I usually attach the three of them together, I kind of fold up the mesh almost accordion style on one end like this, and I attach all three pieces using a zip tie. And then again, I hang it somewhere, and I usually braid it and then attach a zip tie on the other end. And so you'll have a nice little, you know, piece of braided mesh, nice and sparkly for your wreath center. And we're just gonna glue gun this together. So I'll try to show you that. Move some of these things out of the way. Hopefully my glue gun is nice and warm. And I gotta keep my finger protectors nearby. So really, the center I like to have really tight. So usually I like to wrap it first into a nice little, almost like a little knot before I start gluing. And then you're just gonna go along the inside and glue. Glue and hold. Get another stick of glue in there. Pretty easy. Just be careful of your fingers. I always lose track of the glue as I'm doing this and melt my fingers together. Just keep it nice and tight. It should dry as you go. You see the little zip tie is going to be, the zip tie end would be in the center. That'll all be hidden in the back. For the larger wreath, if you're going to do a 12-inch frame, I usually make each of these mesh pieces 4 feet long. Just give you a little bit extra length. Because the wreath itself, I bring this back in here, there's not that much space in the middle there, so this will fit nicely right in that little, it's almost like a little cup area. All right, so almost done. And really at the end here, I just like to wrap this around the back and sort of glue it next to the other zip tie. So this was the original zip tie on one end, and then this is just gonna scoop back there. Gonna have to hold it for a bit to get that to stay. Just gonna hold this. And then I'm gonna cut a lot of this extra mesh that's sort of sticking out at the end. I'm very generous with my glue at this point. You don't want this coming apart. And then as that dries, I really should have done this before, but I want to cut some of this extra mesh out of the way. Too much. Yeah. Lots of little strands. We'll just trim those. Better. And there, I think we're starting to get the glue solid there. I'll do a little bit more glue just to keep these ends from poking out the side here. I'll use the table to my advantage here. And then once this is all done, I just like to loop a zip tie, not a zip tie, a pipe cleaner through some of the mesh on each side of this braided center. And so I'll just loop it in one side and then go to the next and add some glue to that too. Let's see if I can do that and hold the wreath at the same time. I'll show you a little closer once I get it in there. So I just sort of loop through a few squares on one end, and then I'll loop it through a few squares on the other end if I can find a favorable spot here that hasn't been glued. Goodness. Not cooperating. There we go. There we go. Let's see. Get my finger all glued together here. Gotta take that out and do that again. Sometimes I weave this a little too tight. There we go. There we go. And so you're just going to weave it in and out of the mesh. I add a spot of glue on top of that. And so I sort of put this pipe cleaner a little off center, which I don't like a lot, but for now it'll have to do. We're just going to thread this into the center of our wreath. And we should be done. Get that guy right in the middle. All right. Tuck that guy in there. Guy in there. Make sure it's nice and centered. And there you go. And then you're just going to add a coordinating zip tie, or not zip tie, pipe cleaner on the back to hang it. And then I like to zip tie a nice piece of felt to the back. Just a couple zip ties around the outer perimeter there so you don't scratch your door. And there she is. She's really pretty. I like her. She's nice and sparkly. She'll look happy on your door. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll be back next week. If you like what I do, hit subscribe so you can see more videos. Have a nice day.